There's a lot of things that can go wrong with the two buttons on top of the JoyCon controller. I'm talking about the L and R buttons and also the ZL and ZR buttons. I'll list many of the things that can happen on the screen right here. And there's a lot of reasons why these things go wrong. In this video, I'm going to attempt to help you repair those issues. And some of the things I show you can be done by an amateur who has never worked on a controller before. But later on in the video, I'll get into some more technical things that involve taking apart your controller, including how to work with some of those complicated ribbon cables that are inside. Now, one of the things that happens is that dirt and gunk gets around those buttons and it causes them not to work properly. What I like to do is take a piece of paper from some junk mail or something and then just stick the paper into the sides of the button and move it back and forth. Try to press the buttons up and down as you do this. Even if only one of your buttons is malfunctioning, it's good to just do this to all the buttons since you're already going to be cleaning the controller anyway. You can also take a toothbrush and accomplish the same thing. I find that the paper seems to work a little bit better though. You could just do both. A good follow-up to doing that is to take your vacuum cleaner and take the extension hose and just suck the dirt out from around those buttons. You may have knocked some loose with the paper or the toothbrush, so hopefully this will suck it right out. Push the buttons down as you do this. This may also be a good time to hit the like button on the video if you think this video is helpful. And also, you can blow into the controller. You can get a straw and do it. Some people actually put their mouths up against the buttons and blow into the gaps. You can use canned air, or you can use an electronic duster like this one. The bottom line is that dirt may not end up being your actual issue, but you should always try these things first because they don't take that much work and they could always use a good cleaning anyway. If it didn't work, continue with this video. We still have some options left that don't involve going inside. One of them is to send your JoyCon to Nintendo to repair. I have never done it myself, but from what I understand, Nintendo will fix it for free, even if it's outside the warranty period. If it's too damaged, they may just send you a different JoyCon to replace it with, so just keep that in mind. If you have a special edition JoyCon controller, you may not want to take the risk of them swapping it for another type of JoyCon. You may also want to update the JoyCon controller with the latest firmware. It's a long shot, but I've had some people say they had a problematic controller and then they download an update and then it starts working again. First, make sure you have the latest system update installed on your Switch. So to update the system, go to System Settings, System, and then System Update. It'll check to see if you have the latest firmware, and if you don't, it'll give you a little prompt to download it. And then to update your JoyCons, go to System Settings, Controllers and Sensors, Update Controllers. There is still another option, and a lot of people don't know about this one because it hasn't been around since the beginning of the Switch. It's something that Nintendo has added to the system through firmware updates. And that's the ability to remap buttons. So if one of those buttons on top of your controller doesn't work correctly for you, instead remap it to a button that you don't use as often. Go to System Settings, Controllers and Sensors, and then change button mapping. You'll have to select which JoyCon you want to do this to, and then select Change. It'll give you a map of the current configuration. So let's say I want to map my L button to the up arrow button. I would select the up arrow button and hit A to go into the next screen. Then I would select the L button. You can see here it's showing a representation of that change. It says it's going from up arrow to L. To confirm that, I select Done. And it's now been changed, and you'll see there's a little wrench symbol appearing next to that JoyCon controller on this screen. So anytime I come back to this screen, that symbol is going to be there. It's a sign that someone has changed the button layout. I have the option to reset it back to normal if I wanted to. It's a really cool feature. If none of these options have worked for you or they're options that you don't want to use, it's time to go inside the controller. For the rest of this video, I'm going to disassemble the controller just enough to get closer to the L and R buttons and the ZL and ZR buttons so that you can look at them, fix them if you see any problems, and clean them if they need cleaning. Bear with me, it's going to be very detailed. I do want to give you a warning. Going inside your controller is risky. There's a lot of small pieces in there. I'm going to be very detailed and careful at describing the process, but no matter how good I am at doing that, the risk will never be zero. You could accidentally drop a screwdriver on it or something and it's ruined. So just keep that in mind and be careful if you want to proceed. I also advise that you watch the whole remaining of the video before you attempt to go inside yourself. That way you can be as cautious as possible and you'll know which tools you'll need to do it. The left and right Joy-Cons are actually a little bit different inside. So you're going to see me move between the two throughout the video, and I'll point out any differences in the process when it's relevant. We're first going to take the screws off the back. To do that part, you need a tri-wing bit screwdriver. There's 3 different sizes that I have found that work, and I'll put those on the screen right here. Bear in mind that if you try to turn the screw and it doesn't move, you may strip it and it may be unremovable at that point. I recommend you drop 1 drop of water on each screw and let it soak for a minute, and clean out any gunk that's around the screws, and also tap on the screws, and then just try to dry it a little bit and then start screwing it out. Don't worry, a few drops of water are not going to ruin your controller. But once you do get inside, if you do see some moisture, go ahead and wipe it up. With the screws removed, you now have to pry the upper shell and lower shell apart. It helps to have a prying tool to get it started. You may be able to use a plastic butter knife or possibly your fingernails. And you have to open it up like a book. The binder of that book is the black portion on the Joy-Con that locks onto the switch. It comes apart like this. And the reason I say open it like a book is because there's some ribbon cables that connect the 2 halves. You don't want to yank the 2 halves apart and rip those cables. Both the left and the right Joy-Cons open the same way. And this is what they both look like when they're opened at this step. Now that you have better access, you can go up near the top and blow away any dirt that's still up there. I do not recommend using the vacuum cleaner at this point. You may suck a component into the vacuum cleaner. If your problem is the ZL or ZR button, you want to inspect underneath it. It's hard to get a good view of it, so get a light or something to shine in there, but you should see 2 springs on the lower edges of that button, and then you should see an actual button under the button. Make sure when you're blowing the stuff out that you blow out in that area down there. That little tiny button can get a lot of dirt built up on it, which causes it to not function well. If you notice one of the springs is missing, it must have broke and fell off into the controller. If so, try to find it and retrieve it. If it is broken or missing, order a new one. I'm going to take this button further apart so I can show you how to replace the springs, and we can also inspect to see if there's any additional damage that we can't see right now with the button in the way. So next, we're going to take the battery out. This is where things are going to be different for the left and right Joy-Con. We'll start with the left one. There's a little bit of an area to the side of the battery where you can pull it out with just your fingers. Bear in mind that sometimes Nintendo puts a lot of stickiness under the battery to keep it from falling out. So if this is your first time inside the controller, it may take a lot of pulling to get it to come out. And I'm just going to lay the battery off to the side. Some people like to disconnect it at this point from the board, but that connector is very fragile, so I recommend you just set it to the side. This will reveal 5 more screws, but we're only going to unscrew 3 of them. You'll notice that 2 of them are further down. They actually are not attached to this plastic battery piece. These are not tri-wing, these are tiny Phillips head screws, and I'm able to use 2 different sizes to unscrew them. That allows you to take off the middle layer, and there's 1 little tiny fragile ribbon cable that connects it to the back layer, so just be careful about that and set it aside. If you have the right Joy-Con, the process is a little bit different. Before you remove the battery, you first have to take this little NFC chip out of the slot that's next to the battery. It has a wire that is tucked into a gap around the battery. Go ahead and pull the wire carefully out of that gap, and then just let the component just hang off to the edge. And then you can grab the battery from its side and pry it out with your finger. There are 3 screws that are holding on the middle piece. Once again, you'll need a tiny Phillips bit, and then set it off to the side. So this is what things look like at this point in the video. We're now very deep, and we can do all kinds of things related to the L and R button and the ZL and ZR buttons. Let's talk a little bit about the ribbon cables. Sometimes these can come out. It may have been because somebody has been inside before and they didn't properly secure it before they left. These ribbon cables can also be flipped around, so they're in the connectors incorrectly, if that makes sense. So I'm going to tell you which way they need to face, and I'm going to show you a little bit about how to connect and disconnect them. They're all very fragile, so just be careful. You will require tweezers in order to do anything with them. So I'm going to start with the left Joy-Con here. This little ribbon cable here connects to the ZL button that's on the middle piece that we just removed in the last step. I'm going to show you how to take it out of its connector. There is a gate that has to be flipped up, and then the connector can be just pulled out. The method I find most useful is to rock it back and forth a little bit at the head with some tweezers, and then it just comes out like that. You'll notice that the contacts on that cable, the shiny part of it, are facing upward. That is not a rule that is 100% true for every ribbon cable in the Joy-Cons. And just for reference, this is what the other side looks like. On the right Joy-Con, the situation is a little bit different. The connector faces a different way, and the gate that's on it is on the side of the connector. You have to flip it upward like this. Rock it back and forth a little bit here. And then the connector comes right out. That connector had the contacts facing downward, which was opposite of how it was situated in the left Joy-Con controller. So let me get back to the ZL and ZR button. I'm going to show you how to remove it from this middle piece. You can probably do this part without disconnecting the cable that I just showed you, but it does give you a lot more maneuverability. This button is clamped onto this plastic through these two tabs that are right here on the back of it. You'll need to take a little pointy tool, like the one I have here, and press into those gaps. Make sure your tool is not larger than the gaps because you're going to end up damaging those gaps. As you're pressing on them, you'll want to push them in a certain direction. This is what it looks like when it's all the way out. You can see that pressing it did damage those tabs a little bit, but they still work fine. And I actually tested the buttons afterward. By the way, this process is the same for the left and right Joy-Con. There should be two springs. They may or may not be on their little pillars here, but this is where they're supposed to be. There's also a tiny screw that's holding this button component on. Like I mentioned, you can order some spring replacements and then just pop them in at this time. But this button here can cause some issues too. One could be dirt that gets in around it, so this is another good time to try cleaning it. But you'll also want to inspect this mechanism itself to make sure it hasn't broken off the board. Tap on it to see if it's loose or anything. If it does look like it needs replaced, you can replace this by ordering this component and taking that screw off and just replacing it with the new component. In a few moments, I'll show you how to plug the ribbon cable back in. If your problem is an L or an R button, you now have a lot of access for that as well. This is the left Joy-Con that I'm talking about. I'll talk about the right one in a moment here. There is one spring that's in there, which you can easily replace. This button is in a slot and it's real easy to take it out to get to the spring. You also have another button component that can come off the board here. So inspect this button, see if it needs cleaned, and make sure it's still attached to the board. Even if it doesn't look damaged, you can always swap it out. You can order the replacement. It comes with this board, and this ribbon that connects them all together. So you have to remove all that stuff and replace it. That ribbon cable connects right here. This time the contacts are facing down. If it's your R button on your right Joy-Con, then I got bad news. It's not as replaceable as the other one. The button is connected to the entire board. So in order to replace it, you would have to do some soldering, or you would have to buy the entire board. Clean it as much as you can to see if you can get it working. If not, you may just want to order a new Joy-Con. You could try getting a broken Joy-Con off eBay and just replace the whole piece. but you may inherit whatever problem that Joy-Con was having. But if all you need to do is replace the spring, that is easy. This button just slides right out of the slot. I think I have pretty much touched on everything that can be wrong with these buttons, so now I'll move on to reassembling everything. I'll start with the right Joy-Con. If you have disconnected the ribbon cable that holds the middle piece, then you will have to do what is probably the hardest part of this video, and that is put that ribbon cable back into that little slot. The thing is, there's not much slack in that ribbon cable, so you have to get the whole piece really close to the connector. I couldn't get this part on camera, but I'll do my best to describe the process. The contacts need to face downward, so just keep that in mind. Like I mentioned, you have to get that middle piece very close to the board in order to get yourself enough maneuverability with the ribbon cable. The best method I found was to put the two halves close together, kind of like a clam, and stick the tweezers in the tiny gap within the clam's mouth, and then grab the head of that component and just put it into the slot and then close the gate. Give yourself a lot of time and patience to do this part. Once it's on there, that piece will go into place pretty easily. Remember to put that chip back into place and to tuck the wire that goes to it carefully into the gap that goes around the battery compartment. And then just plop the battery back in. And then screw the back on. Now for the left Joy-Con, you do have a ribbon cable here that you need to re-plug into this connector here. This time the contacts need to face upward. Screw the middle piece back in. Put the battery back in its spot. And then screw the rest of it back together. Let me know if this video has helped you, or if you have any additional questions. If you're interested, I made a similar video regarding the analog sticks on the Joy-Cons. That video is linked in front of you. Have a good day, everybody.